So good evening, everyone. Mr. Chair, briefly, I will just run through the list of panelists again that we have with us tonight. So I confirm we now have quorum, and all committee members are present with the exception of Councillor Oosterhoff, who did provide his regrets this evening. So staff with us are Desiree Kennedy, CFO and City Treasurer, Lana Folds, Director, Financial Services, Jeff Walker, Manager, Taxation and Revenue, Laura Raby, Administrative Manager, Rideau Crest Home. Ian Sullivan is our host this evening, as well as myself, Julia McCarty-Jansman, Committee Clerk. We also have the KPMG auditors with us on the call, Lori Huber and Rebecca Prophet, although I believe it's just Lori Huber at the moment. And there are no members of the public with us currently. So Mr. Chair, I'll turn it back to you to begin the meeting.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Sorry, I was a couple of minutes late there. I am just going to pull up the agenda here and we'll get started. So we have quorum. The first thing to do is to approve the agenda. So I need a mover and a seconder for the agenda. Moved by Councillor Chappell, seconded by Councillor Bohm. Are there any proposed changes to the agenda? Seeing none, I'll call.
Yes, with the addeds, Mr. Chair.
Oh, thank you, Clerk Osanek. Yes, so there is an addendum. We'll just make sure everybody is aware because I did see it, but we'll just go back to. Unfortunately, I'm forced with only one screen to toggle, so just bear with me. So on the addendum, there is business item E, the War Veterans Organizations Property Tax Exemption pursuant to the Assessment Act. There's just that one item on the agenda. So I'm looking for
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Sorry, just to clarify that it is the request for withdrawal of that report on the addendum this evening.
Sorry, I should have specified. Item E is if the addendum passes, will be withdrawn. So I guess it's in order to speak to either the addendum or the agenda, because we're about to approve the agenda with the withdrawal of the addendum. Does anyone wish to speak? Seeing none, then we will vote on the agenda with item E removed and the rest as posted. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Next item is, hang on, sorry. So the minutes of June 10th. So we need a mover that was at the meeting and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Chappell. Seconded by Councillor Bohm. Any errors or omissions to the minutes? Seeing none, call the question on the minutes. All those in favor? And opposed? Councillor Chappell, you're in favor, I believe. I'll take that as a yes. Now we have disclosure of pecuniary interest. Seeing none. Madam Clerk, are there any delegations?
Mr. Chair, there are no delegations this evening.
Okay. I do not see Rebecca Prophet, so that would mean that the briefing is Lori Huber from KPMG Chartered Accountants speaking to us with respect to the 2021 interim audit and external audit plan report.
Mr. Chair.
Have the floor.
Mr. Chair, through you, we are on the agenda. It does state that we are going to hear the briefing directly prior to business item B. So the Rideau Crest Home report will go first.
I'm sorry, and you did actually tell me that before. It's my mind. I'm sorry. So the briefing is actually after item A, before item B. So we go straight to business 7A, Rideau Crest Home Report. So we will hear there's the report. It's an information item. And we need a mover and a seconder to resolve ourselves into the Board of Management for Rideau Crest. Moved by Councillor Rosanek. We need a seconder, second by Councillor McLaren. All those in favor? And that passes. So now, yes, Councillor Chappelle, did you wish to speak, or you're just passing the motion? Yeah, okay. So now we will, there's an information report from Rideau Crest Home, and we'll go to the administrator of Rideau Crest to introduce the report, and then we'll have questions. Go ahead.
Good evening, committee. I'm here on Casey Key's behalf. I'm Laura Raby, Administration Manager at Rideau Crest Home, and I'm going to provide a high-level review of our information report this evening, and then happy to answer any questions you may have. This is the second report that's been provided to the Rideau Crest Board of Management for 2021. So this report does contain information from May 1st through to September 15th of 2021. So far this year, we've maintained an occupancy rate of 92.43%, and that's through to mid-September. The occupancy rate protection for all homes across Ontario is set to expire January of 2022, whereby we will need to get our occupancy to the standard of 97% at that time. And the home is actively working towards that target. Rideau Crest Home had 12 incidents reportable to the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care within the reporting period. The ministry was on site in June to review 4 critical incidents and 4 complaints, and no issuances of non-compliance were found at that time. We had Accreditation Canada in the home from September 27th to 29th to do a review of best practice standards in the home. And we are currently waiting for the final report and outcome of the visit, and we'll expect to have that to report back to you on our next information report. The home was able to provide a polling station for residents to participate in the federal election, which we had 32 residents participate, and we were quite happy at that turnout in the home. We're currently actively working with several local post-secondary institutions to invite students back into the home. We currently have a group of students in-house. We have more starting in November and look forward to some more in January. So very happy to have students back and supporting the nursing team. Rideau Crest continues to work very closely with the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, the Local Health Integration Network, and our Public Health Unit to ensure safety and security of residents and staff is our #1 priority related to COVID-19. As of today, we continue to have not reported any positive cases of COVID-19 among residents or staff. Management continues to communicate closely with all staff and families to ensure they're aware of all provincial directives, public health guidelines, home directives, as well as plans and preparations in the event an outbreak is declared in the home. As of September 15th, the home had only 2 residents who chose not to receive either dose of the vaccine, and just 1 had decided not to receive the second dose. So that's a 97% vaccine rate among our residents. We currently have a 93% vaccine rate among fully vaccinated staff, which will increase as a result of the mandatory vaccine policy that is to be fully implemented by November 15th. And we'll update you with details on that in our next report. Our residents did receive their 3rd dose of the COVID-19 vaccine on September 16th. So we're very happy to have that line of defense for our residents against the virus as well. As part of the provincial budget release for 2021, the government has announced plans to increase staffing to reflect 4 hours of care per resident per day. We continue to await this funding announcement daily now. We're hoping by the end of the week to understand what that looks like for Rideau Crest Home. Despite that lack of announcement, staff have evaluated the current nursing complement for all 3 disciplines of PSWs, RPNs, and RNs as they contribute to the 4 hours of care, and identified the highest priority position in the home at this time. And as such, 2 full-time RPN positions were approved and added to the staffing complement in July. At the end of August, Rideau Crest had spent 64% of its municipal contribution, which equates to being $158,000 under budget. The province continues to provide emergency COVID-19 containment funding for all long-term care homes on a monthly basis, and this continues to support our need for incremental resources required to keep residents and staff safe from COVID-19 while they're in the workplace. And it also funds additional staff to support screening and rapid testing at the front entrance to the home for everybody who enters the home. The home continues to work very closely with the facilities management and construction group on capital projects and renovations in the home. We are very excited to report that the floor replacement project, which is all the main corridors and resident rooms, is complete. We have a bathroom renovation mock-up that's almost ready for review by residents and staff to make sure they're happy with it before that project carries on. And we're about to begin our center core renovations. So that's all for my summary for today, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Thank you. We now go to questions from members of the board to Rideau Crest staff. Does anyone have any questions about the report? Go ahead, Councillor Sanik.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thanks so much for the report. I've been happy throughout the last 18 months that there's been no cases of COVID at all at Rideau Crest. That's terrific. For the 93% of staff that have been fully vaccinated, do we foresee there to be a staffing problem at all if they don't get the second vaccine, or are we pretty good now since the students are coming back? And I imagine the students are fully vaccinated. And sorry if you mentioned that. I had to zone out for 2 minutes with some crisis in the back room. And if you mentioned that for those 2 minutes, I apologize. Thank you.
No, that's a great question, and through you, Mr. Chair. So we have seen an increase in staff going to get vaccinated. We had 19 staff equated to the 7% that weren't vaccinated. So since the release of the mandatory vaccine policy, we have seen some go get vaccinated. We do anticipate there will be a few who will not be vaccinated, so they will be placed on an unpaid leave. So any more shortage in staffing in not just long-term care, hospital care as well, is not desirable at this point in time, but we do have plans in place. We continue to be actively recruiting and finding innovative ways to attempt recruitment so that we can maintain staffing levels in the home. So we don't anticipate it to be a lot of people if we do in fact have some that go on an unpaid leave of absence. So we have plans in place so that we're as successful as we can be in maintaining staffing after November 15th.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions from members of the board?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. This question is really just a personal ask. Ms. Ravi, if you could go back to your staff and just thank them for the outstanding effort that they've had over this lengthy period of time. The residents of Kingston and being safe in their most vulnerable states is very much an important aspect and line of sight for our committee here in particular, and most of council, I'm sure. So just if you can just go back and thank them on our behalf, that would be great.
Absolutely.
Okay, any other questions? Yeah, I just like, as the chair, I'd like to say I'm also impressed by the 0 cases in your facility. That's quite a thing. We hope we haven't jinxed you by mentioning it. It's not just, I don't think we should focus only on the vaccination rate when we're talking about that achievement. That achievement is only possible through teamwork, constant vigilance. I speak from experience. Everybody has to sort of chip in and relieve in the, sanitization procedures and the gowning and masking when necessary and all that kind of thing. Everything that all staff do for the maintenance and protection of the residents is all part of it. And it you let your guard down once and you can start getting transmission. So whatever it is you're doing, keep it up on that score. And you know, I think the board, I speak for the board to say that we're impressed by the pandemic response in Rideau Crest, and so yeah, I'd like to echo my colleagues' comments in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, if there's no more questions, we will then need a motion to rise from the Board of Management. Thank you, Ms. Rabi. Who wants to move? Okay, moved by Councillor Chappelle, second by Councillor Sanik. All those in favor? And that carries. On to business item B. So first we have the briefing. So like I mentioned before, Ms. Hugh from KPMG will introduce this item. Will actually brief us with this item. So briefings have a maximum of 10 minutes. And Ms. Huber, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pleased to be here tonight, and I assure you I will keep it to 10 minutes or less. I fully recognize our audit plan has been pre-circulated as part of the package. And really my purpose here tonight is to walk you through the highlights and certainly gain your unique insights as a committee relative to the completion and execution of our audit for fiscal 2021. So as you would be accustomed to, we come forth to this committee each and every year to present our audit plan. It's still early days with respect to our audit. We've had good conversations with management to understand what was new and different this year to incorporate into our plan. And certainly the bulk of our audit is yet to come, with the interim audit slated for November and the bulk of the work to happen in the winter months on the year-end completion. So with that, jumping into some of the highlights in our audit plan, you will see that there are no significant changes to the audit plan relative to the previous year. So last year, if you would recall, there were certain standard changes. This year, it's actually status quo, both on the accounting side of the house, along with the auditing side of the house. So nothing new to contemplate there. We've talked a lot over the last couple of years with respect to the implications of COVID-19 on the financial statements, along with our external audit. And certainly that will be incorporated throughout our audit plan again this year, but unfortunately, it's not new and different this year. So one of the things you will see in our audit planning report that we always have conversations around is materiality, because it's very much referenced in our annual contribution to the audit process, which is in our independent auditors report, which makes reference to this concept. So materiality is what is meant to change a user's decision on the financial statements. It is a quantification to perform a basis and by which we carry out our audit procedures. So what you'll see here is there is a number of items that we have reflected on this slide as part of our presentation, but the story really is this year, with all of the changes and all of the things happening this year, I've proposed to keep materiality as a whole consistent with where it's been actually for the last couple of years at an overall amount of $10 million. So that is on the consolidated basis, reflecting the individual components that feed into the overall financial statement audit for the city. And what that means is when we come back to this committee in the spring with our audit findings report, to the extent we identify any differences in the accounts in excess of $500,000, we will carry those forward as part of our audit report, and certainly have had conversations with management in terms of the implications of those. But just as a reminder to the committee, that certainly hasn't been an issue in the past, nor are we expecting that to be something that arises this year. So just as a reminder to the committee as well, we've included some slides in our report that make reference to the group audit. So as I said earlier, there are a number of components that feed into the overall financial statements for the city of Kingston. We audit each and every one of those components, which would include the utilities as well. So certainly all of the work will be done at the component level to ultimately feed into the overall components on the consolidated level. The significant items, of course, which are no surprise, relate to the utilities. In terms of audit risk, our audit approach continues to be consistent, being an audit risk-based approach. So we stand back, look at the financial statements as a whole to try to identify where we believe in our judgment there's a greater risk of material misstatement, and certainly develop audit procedures to address those risks. In each and every audit in Canada, there are also presumed risks relative to the risk of fraud within any organization. So those are also included as part of our audit plan, which is not uniquely different from previous years. And those will certainly also be included in our audit findings report back to you in the spring. So relative to our audit approach, we've given you an overview of some of the significant captions, both on your statement of financial position or your balance sheet, along with your statement of operations, be it the revenues and expenses. I would say at a high level, not a lot of significant changes year over year. Certainly the highlights of the audit from an income statement perspective continue to be our focus on payroll, because payroll is such a large proportion of your overall expenditures in any given year. And beyond that, again, not a whole lot of change. However, in each and every year under Canadian auditing standards, we are also required to include an element of unpredictability, whereby we identify a certain number of procedures that are uniquely different from the previous year to give that element of unpredictability to management as they prepare for our audit arrival. In terms of key milestones and deliverables, we're following a very similar schedule as we have in previous years, having had the kickoff from a planning perspective in September, and that's ultimately with the goal to be back in front of this committee for the June meeting. The team you will see is fairly consistent year over year. Unfortunately, Rebecca Prophet was slated to be with me here tonight, but she's feeling under the weather. And we're also bringing back Caitlin Cox, who's an experienced manager with us here locally, and she's worked with the city of Kingston in a variety of capacities as well. So we've added her to the team at a senior level again this year. You will see our fees as well included in our report that is very much consistent with what we had proposed on back in July 24th, 2020. Moving into some of the other audit work, we always give a lot of attention to the main financial statements, but as a reminder to the committee, there are other requirements throughout the course of the year that we do opine on working with management, and we've included those as well in our report. In the back of our appendices of our report, you will see some other required communications. So as you are aware, we are very much required to maintain our independence as your external auditors. So to the extent we might provide any non-audit services to the organization through the course of the year, we should be very much open and upfront and transparent around those. And we certainly have a robust internal process to make sure we are all aware of any other engagements that might be happening outside of the external audit. And at this point in time, there's certainly nothing that might be thought to encroach on our independence. The other piece that you'll see in the back of our report speaks to some of the accounting changes that are coming in the future. A big one for municipalities as a whole speaks to asset retirement obligations. Certainly have had a number of conversations with management thus far in contemplation of this new standard, and certainly through the course of the year, we will continue on with those conversations to make sure the city is in a good position for implementation. Behind there, I've also included some resources for your perusal if you're interested in some additional resources with respect to audit and assurance insights. And that, Mr. Chair, at a very high level is our report for the 2021 year, and happy to take any questions, comments, or feedback.
Thank you, Ms. Huber. It's, as always, most thorough and also, as you say, high level. And we, as committee members, probably struggle how to engage with the report because there are different things that are reported at different times. And I'm sure that any clarification needed can be achieved with questions. So we'll go to members of the committee. Who would like, does anyone have any questions about this interim report? So just to clarify, Madam Clerk, we have the briefing was for the interim audit and external audit plan. So we see on the agenda several items. Is it in order to ask questions about any of the items, or should we wait till each one comes up?
As we are in the briefing section, we can do questions from the committee and then we'll proceed right into the business item. It is only for information purposes. And we do have no members of the public with us. So we can, from the briefing, we can just go right into business item B. And then from there, we'll go through the agenda.
Right. So to remind the committee, so there's questions out for the briefing from members of the committee only, and then when the business item on the same topic is on the floor, there's questions first, then we go to members of the public, of which there are none. Therefore, we will move now to the business item. And then, so now we're at the questions section of the business item 7B. And the questions can be, I think, now that we're in the business item, the questions can be to the auditor or to staff. Is that correct, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Okay. Anyone have any questions to either the presenter or to staff about business item 7B? Councillor Spell.
Yes, my question is to Ms. Hoover. In the preparation of your audit plan for 2021, were you given any direction to also look at all expenses related to consulting fees and services by various departments and bring that forward to council?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that certainly was a discussion that has ensued based on the previous year, and we've had conversations with the CFO and treasurer, and perhaps Ms. Kennedy might want to speak to that item as well.
Go ahead, Madam Treasurer.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So yes, certainly the consulting and contracted services is part of the overall audit plan and materiality levels, Councillor. We have not at this point directed the auditors or even my staff in terms of providing a summary similar to what we did last year for the committee. I think that motion last year was specific to the 2020 year. And so we'd require something specific from the committee. If you wanted something similar for 2021, we could do that. That wasn't subject to audit at the end of the day. That was just city staff preparing that information. But I certainly can confirm, and I think Ms. Humer may want to add that those expenditures are part of the standard audit procedures.
So to clarify my understanding, and I appreciate you responding, Ms. Kennedy, will there be a clear delineation of the amount of money spent on consultants and external services put forward by the city in the next fiscal year in this plan? Whether it's a report, or will there be, like last year you had me create a motion in order to have this compelled, and I'm wondering, do I have to do the same thing this year in order to access that information?
So thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So I'm just trying to think in terms of the standard reporting, there would be nothing to the detail level that we provided last year to the committee. There is a breakdown by function of the types of expenditures in the financial statements, but I don't believe it goes down to that level of granularity to consulting services. So to your question, happy to provide that as part of the year-end process again, if that's something that the committee would like us to do. I don't necessarily need a motion. If that's something that you're directing, then we'll certainly make that as part of the year-end reporting, similar to what we did last year when we brought the financial statements and we had it as a separate exhibit.
Before Councillor Spell, let me just interject. So it's important that we are all aware of the procedure surrounding what happened last year and what is being suggested now by a member of the committee. So the treasurer has just offered to make some information available based on this question, not having a formal motion from the committee as we had last year. I think if that were to happen, perhaps the member should specify, and it can be tonight or it can be by future communication, specifically what it is members of the public would like to see categorized. Because I think I think unless you're very specific, Councillor Chappelle, you may keep asking sort of this type of question without receiving the information that you are seeking. So you can do that tonight, or you can do that with a direct. Madam Treasurer, would you accept such a request from a member of the committee in preparation for the year-end reports? If you want, if any of the members of the committee want any specific line broken down further, they can so request. Is that true?
Yes, absolutely, Mr. Chair, that's fine. I think recall, and the councillor might recall better than me, I believe last year we actually set a threshold of, I think it was greater than 20,000. And the reason we did that is because we actually utilized the monthly delegated authority reports that come to council to help us pull some of that information, and that threshold is at 20,000. And so I think we did that last year by group, if I recall. So yes, happy, Mr. Chair, to do that. If there's anything else specific that we can build into the reporting that's over and above sort of the level that comes with the audited financial statements.
The other comment that came up last year, Ms. Kennedy, was that you did not have the system set up to track consulting fees specifically, that you were going to work on it over the course of this year. Has that been resolved? Is this information more readily accessible now?
Yes, so thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So yes, we do have it segregated much better now within the financial system, that we should be able to run those specific reports out of the financial system and get the amounts. And I think what we did last year is we did something similar, only then we went back to the procurement piece of it as well, just to make sure that nothing was missing. So it was a bit of a validation process. I think we'll still do the same thing this year, just to make sure that the reporting is complete. But certainly over the year, we've been much more careful in terms of making sure that we're posting things to the appropriate types of accounts, so that everything is getting captured appropriately.
Just so you understand why this is an issue for myself and other residents who bring it to my attention, is that, you know, rather than continually investing and spending money on consultants, we should be investing in the staff that we have at the City of Kingston to make sure they have the tools to perform these functions without always parceling this out to external parties. That doesn't leave any institutional memory for our organization or help us grow as an organization. So I'm very cognizant of that. It's about staff development. It's not necessarily about trying to cut costs, because I'd like to see that investment put into staff rather than external parties.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. So, on the one hand, we have to keep our comments and questions directly related to the item in hand. On the other hand, you've just made an excellent suggestion that would be qualified as direction from council if it happened, as to invest in staff and to have that work done in-house rather than going to consultants. I would suggest that the decision to go to a consultant isn't really the purview of the auditor, but rather of senior staff. So this is the kind of thing that we should be discussing at strategic planning or any other high-level discussions that direct senior staff about how to acquire this expertise. It's an excellent suggestion, but it's not very directly accessible through the method of this committee on this item, I would suggest. Yeah, so, and we can't really, like that said, we can't really have a debate on the merits in this committee. It's for committee of the whole, and also unless it's directly information that is or is not in the audit, it's not relevant to this piece. So maybe we should just go back to Ms. Huber. You spoke of materiality. Is there a way, is it part of your standard procedure to analyze the total consultant fee, tab across all departments in the audit, or is does it show up simply as line items and whether they meet materiality or not, and like how does it relate to the audit?
Sure, thank you, Mr. Chair. So in terms of our audit, we are required to do a certain level of testing, if you will, on the expenditures. They would be the expenditures in total, not necessarily strictly consulting. Consulting to us wouldn't necessarily have any additional risk attached to it, if you will. So it would be part of our overall sampling. So as part of our audit procedures each and every year, we do unpredictable items around the procurement process, which may or may not include consulting, but certainly we can make sure that we included consulting this year for other purposes. The other piece is we make sure that the expenditures that are being reported are appropriate. So they would be included in that bucket as well. But in terms of focusing specifically on consulting, that's not necessarily part of our overall audit approach to opine on the financial statements as a whole.
So if I understand correctly, from an audit point of view, those expenses don't stand out on the metrics that you use in a way that would be useful to what Councillor Chappell is suggesting. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair. So I think what you might be referring to perhaps is maybe some benchmarking in terms of the relativity compared to others. That's certainly not something a financial statement audit would get you. Again, I don't know if Ms. Kennedy might want to speak to that item or not.
Thank you. So through you, Mr. Chair, yeah, I think it's definitely not part of the audit. There are ways that we can do some benchmarking. We certainly have access to the financial information returns that are filed by each municipality across Ontario. And there is I think it's called a contracted services category that we can do some analysis on. The challenge, I think, is in doing that, and we certainly ran into that in terms of pulling the information together last year that the committee had asked for, is defining contracted services. So, and I'm sorry, I can't recall, Councillor, whether we called it contracted services or consulting services, but there is a difference between hiring a consultant perhaps to do a review that maybe could be done internally by staff for whatever reason, a consultant's hired. But our contracted services also would include things like MPAC fees to do the assessment work. So that's not something we could do. So I think that's the challenge in doing the benchmarking, is we don't know how other municipalities, how they're defining and classifying within that category. So there certainly is information we can look at, but I think you'd have to do some real drilling down to determine exactly what's included in those categories across other municipalities.
Okay, I have a suggestion. Perhaps Councillor Chappell could speak with your office directly, maybe meet directly outside of the committee and try to determine a methodology we could utilize to gather the information that he's seeking, specifically the expenses going to consultants for work that could be done by a municipal source, and whether that's being done in other municipalities. Like, I mean, it's not easy to quantify directly, but maybe your office could help the councillor come up with a metric to use, because until we have that metric, we're going to go in circles, and it's going to keep coming up at this committee at this time. I'm just trying to move this conversation forward. We need the information. We need it at a high level, and we need to be able to compare it to other municipalities, and we need to be able to pick out those, as the treasurer just said, those instances where perhaps a consultant is not 100% necessary, and whether an investment in a staff member might make more sense, especially if we do it on a yearly basis. I mean, to just use an example, we've got KPMG here that is contracted to do our auditing. I'm pretty sure we couldn't do that in-house because it has to be a third party. Isn't that correct?
Absolutely.
So, an example of one that there's no point in accounting for, because it's simply not procedurally possible to have that in-house. However, we've noticed many other times we've asked something of senior staff and it's come back in the form of a consultant report. And that's problematic as well, because the consultant report isn't something that we can amend. If we get something back from staff, we can send it back to staff if the work's not done. But if it's a consultant, it's a final report, and all we can do is hire another consultant. So that's not only a waste of money; it can be a waste of time for council. So it's a totally legitimate concern, Councillor Chappell, but it's not something the auditor can fix, right? So you need to speak, in my opinion, as chair of the committee. I really think you need to speak to the Treasurer's Office and brainstorm some ways of moving this concept forward in another forum than at audit time, because the auditor is not going to be able to give us that information unless I'm mistaken.
Perhaps the Finance Committee and Audit Committee.
Yeah. Anyways, I'm happy, Councillor, I'm happy to discuss also separately from anything else. Maybe between us, we can come up with some ideas, but it's valiant, persistent effort, but it's just, I can't allow it to keep happening on a year-over-year basis. There's not even any members of the public here, so it's not like we're satisfying any of their questions, right? We have to find a way of doing this at council and getting some results, in my opinion. Does anyone else have anything to say on the auditor's report? So it's the 7B has a recommendation. I'm going to read it now, and then I'll be looking for a mover. That the 2021 audit plan, as presented by KPMG and is attached as Exhibit A to report number AP 21-018, be received for information purposes. The recommendation is to council. Before we move it, Madam Treasurer, does the same information report go to council as part of the committee package, so they have the same information that we have?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think I might have to defer that to the committee clerk. I'm not sure whether an information report goes on the agenda or not.
Mr. Chair, through you, this report is for information purposes only. It is worded a little differently in the recommendation, but it is just to receive by the committee for information.
So the information isn't readily available to council in the package. You'd have to go into the committee minutes and agenda and so on to see the information report?
Correct. It's just for information purposes at the committee level.
Okay. So but it is a recommendation, and once it's moved and seconded, it is amendable. So I would suggest you would only do that if you wanted it to appear to council in a different form. So I need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation to receive it as an information report. Moved by Councillor McLaren, seconded by Councillor Osanek. All right, it is now live. Is there any debate on this recommendation? Okay, then I will call the question on the recommendation to recommend to council that it be received as information. All those in favor? Oppose, and that carries. That's item 7B. So the next one also involves the city treasurer. We're talking about the supplemental financial oversight and responsibilities report. It is an information report as well. Madam Treasurer, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this report is in front of the committee tonight with respect to responding to some additional information that the committee asked for. We did have report 21010, which came before the committee in June with respect to financial oversight matters. And that report was deferred with a motion that asked us to come back with a couple of different things. One, some information on various models that are used by comparative municipalities with respect to how they're overseeing fiscal matters, increased transparency, accountability, and community input on those matters. And secondly, how the committee could select additional information items that related to financial oversight and have them formalized as future committee agenda items. So where there was other things that they would like to have brought before the committee, what would the process be for doing that? And so this report tonight is before you just to provide that additional information that's supplementary to the report that was back in June. So you will see tonight there is an exhibit that is attached to the report, and it includes 20 different Ontario municipalities varying in size and location. We ensured that we were getting some that we thought were similar, certainly in terms of size, but also reached out further in terms of what others were doing, even some larger municipalities with respect to their financial oversight. And so the exhibit provides that. We've also added some additional information around things like the frequency of the meetings. We did add some links to committee terms of reference where they were available for finance committees, just to provide a little more detail as to the types of things that would be on the agendas. And there was also a request of council back when we first took this report to council, asking for some credit rating information with respect to some of those comparator municipalities. And so where we could find that information where it was available, we've also included that in the exhibit. It's interesting to note that out of the 20 municipalities that are listed in the comparative analysis, 10 had what I would call specific standing committees that dealt with financial matters. So about half of them. And the majority of those, certainly the trend was that those committee mandates were broader than just finance. So very similar to, I would say, what the city's administrative policies committee is, that finance is just one component of it. There were examples where committees were also dealing with human resource matters, economic development matters, and other things other than the financial matters and the audit functions. The other interesting thing was that of the total that were reviewed, 9 of them had a separate audit committee, which was performed, which was developed to perform very specific audit oversight function. So particularly in ones where there wasn't a separate finance committee, there still was a separate audit committee that managed just the working with the auditor on the planning, such as we had on the agenda tonight, as well as the audit findings and review of the financial statements. But I can tell you, and you'll see certainly within the exhibit, it is definitely all over the map in terms of what different municipalities are doing and how councils are deciding to look at the financial oversight, how much of it's staying at a committee of the whole or a council level, and how much of it is being delegated to more of a committee level or either a finance or an audit committee level. The second part of the report just provides some information with respect to the process for the committee to request supplementary oversight information. And there's 2 or 3 things that are listed within the report, depending on what the information is. First off, obviously committee members have the opportunity to ask questions or to expand or ask for additional information on current agenda topics. So certainly as has been in the past, where there is a financial issue or financial topic that's on the agenda, there is the ability to expand that or to ask for more information. It may be also that as part of that discussion and those types of financial oversight matters, there may be other things that come up that the committee would like to visit or revisit or have an expanded scope of discussion on a future committee agenda. And so that could be done by way of a motion from the committee, asking staff to bring back additional information, either related to the topic that's on hand or something related to it. And then finally, if there's a specific topic that's completely separate from anything else that's on the agendas with respect to financial oversight, the committee can at any time put forward a motion at the meeting, directing staff to bring that information back for review and discussion on a future agenda. So those are just ways, depending information and what they're looking for, various ways in terms of ensuring that the information does come back from staff and that it's coming on a future agenda. The other thing that I did include in the report is that once the committee is established and we expand some of these financial oversight matters that are coming to the Administrative Policies Committee, there could be consideration given to recommending a proposed annual agenda for financial oversight matters that would come to the committee at the start of the fiscal year. It would have some of the standard things on, like the audit planning report, the audit findings, the financial statements, some of our tax reports that come, and some of those standard ones. But it could also have some of the expanded responsibilities that staff have recommended in the report that came in June. And that might also be a time to have a discussion if there was nothing within that proposed agenda, if there was something else that the committee wanted that wasn't part of those items, that there could be a motion at that time to maybe expand that plan to include those. So I can't say that I've necessarily seen that anywhere else in some of the research that I've done, but I certainly think it's something that could be considered to be done, just to, at least once a year, the committee have an opportunity to look at what's on that plan for the year for those meetings and determine if there's something missing that they feel is important that should be coming before them from a fiscal oversight matter. And I think that's it. Happy to take any questions on that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Madam Treasurer. I'm going to start off with just a brief question for clarification. So these in the exhibit and these other municipalities, there's 20 municipalities surveyed. There's a range of different setups, but the ones where it says no specific committee, is that essentially those matters are dealt with by a committee of the whole? Did you say that? Or are they dealt with by a committee such as the Administrative Policies Committee that we have, which is an umbrella committee? So we have this role, but we have other roles, right? We have all of the administrative type, anything in our mandate, including finance, auditing, and other things. Is that what is meant by no specific committee, or is it that they don't even send it to the committee, or does it vary?
Yeah, thank you through you, Mr. Chair. So yes, where it says there's no specific committee, they do not have standing committees. It's all going to committee of the whole meetings. The only caveat to that is some of them do have a specific audit committee meeting just for the auditors to come and do the presentations at the planning stage and at the final stage. But other than audit, it means that there is no standing committee structure. Those things are all going to a committee of the whole.
Okay, great. And then on the ones that do have a finance committee, do we know if they also have a committee like this, like an umbrella committee, like Administrative Policies, and they've split off finance into a separate committee, so they have two committees that are separate with their own agendas? Is that something that happens? Or is it essentially that our Administrative Policies Committee is equivalent to the finance committees in these municipalities?
Thank you through you, Mr. Chair. So it's a mixture of them. So there are some that have a very specific finance committee, and then would also have other committees that would manage some of the administrative type policy things. I believe there was maybe two, maybe three of those ones that would be involved that had a separate finance committee. The majority of them that had a standing committee were very much like the our Administrative Policies Committee, where it was audit, it was finance, and it was other non-financial administrative type things that were on there. I think that was probably the majority that we saw was very similar to what we have.
And do we have the data of, do any of these committees oversee long-term care homes like we do with Rideau Crest as part of their mandate? Is that part of it?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we did not look at that, so I'm not sure on that. We'd have to do a little bit more digging to determine whether or not that was part of it. I did look at some of the, any of the ones where I've provided the links to term of references. I did not see any that I recall that were also a board for the long-term care, but that's certainly something we could look at to see whether or not that was similar.
Okay, well, that's all my questions for now. We'll go to other members of the committee on this report. Councillor Chappelle.
Certainly appreciate, through you, Mr. Chair, I certainly appreciate the effort that staff has brought back, comparing and looking at other municipalities. It's very helpful to understand. You know, if this was to be a financial tool, this committee, then it should be in the name. You know, it should be, you know, a policy committee and finance. It should be, because quite frankly, when people sign up for this committee, they're looking at the policy items, they're looking at they're not inclined in all, like I to have an interest in understanding where the money is being spent. We're going to be coming out of COVID. We have huge expenditures. We've got a lot of issues that have started out as templates and tested projects that will now become an extended operational expense. And we have no line of sight as councillors. We approve something as a—
Okay, but you need to ask at this point.
Okay, so you know what? Fine, I'm done. I'm not happy.
Okay, so in this, all we can really do is ask about the report. And then if the information's not adequate to, for the purposes of perhaps how we inform council, we need to find a way of making that recommendation. That's basically the situation we're in. And an information report is not the time to make suggestions. It is simply that it's information, and all we can do is clarify that information, and then if more information is needed, we have to find a way of making that happen. If we don't follow the procedure, we just end up having repetitive conversations, and we need to be you know, outcome focused as a committee, because really it's what we're recommending to council. Council's making decisions. If we want to be useful as a committee, that's what we need to do. So I'll leave it at that. We really need to be asking questions on the information report, otherwise we'll move on to the next item. Does anyone have any further questions on the information report of item 7C? Seeing none, there is no actionable item on this, I believe, Madam Clerk.
Mr. Chair, through you, this is just a supplemental report for information. The original recommendation is business item D.
That's right. So the next recommendation is the next one. So we'll move to that one. So it's report 21-010. The recommendation is, there is a recommendation, but we'll let staff introduce the report, and then we'll ask questions, and then we'll move to the recommendation.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. So this was the original report that was before the committee in June, report AP 21010. And this report was basically outlining, based on council's direction, to look at the expanded role of the Administrative Policies Committee with respect to additional financial oversight responsibilities. There were 3 elements that the report addressed around fiscal oversight. The first element was looking at some of the current Administrative Policies Committee agenda items that would fall under the financial oversight umbrella. So certainly things like working with the auditors, reviewing the annual audited financial statements, some of the tax policy pieces that already come to the committee. We then looked at the ability to transition some of the existing oversight responsibilities that council currently does, and was there the ability to bring some of that to the committee to allow for expanded review, for more discussion, for more questions. And so we looked at things like the quarterly operating budget reports, the quarterly capital project status reports that currently go to council, and the ability to bring those instead to the Administrative Policies Committee would provide a forum for asking more specific questions on capital projects and on the operating budgets and the actual results. And then finally, we also looked at some of the procurement delegated authority reporting, again, that currently goes monthly to council, and the ability for that to also come over and be delegated down to the committee level and for staff to bring those reports there. And then finally, this report actually identifies a number of other financial oversight topics that we think could be coming to this committee. Most of which are actually new that don't come now, don't go to council now, or that we know are coming up based on some new initiatives that are happening. So a good example would be our corporate investments. It's something that right now we report at a very high level as part of the annual audited financial statements, but there is some ability to bring some further detail in terms of our investment strategies and our investment portfolios that could come to this committee. And we also looked at things like our annual grant reporting, which is new. Council just recently approved the grant strategy, so there will be an annual grant reporting that could come here as opposed to council as a whole. We also looked at things like asset management and some of the work that's currently being done in that area that could also come to that committee. So this report then outlines within various categories some of this information and whether it's policy related, most of which, if it's policy related, is already coming to this committee. But the report also identifies a number of other categories or other types of information that would be optional for additional information. And I think some of this was relevant to the deferred motion that asked, how could we actually ask for this and get it onto the agenda? So maybe just briefly going through some of these, certainly the external audit process committee is very familiar with, and we wouldn't see any changes to that. The financial reporting process, and I've talked about perhaps moving some of the quarterly reports to the committee level. We would recommend leaving the annual capital report and annual operating report. The year-end report would still come to the council level because it's certainly good information for council as a whole to be aware of, particularly as it relates to budgets and budget projections, which would remain at the council level. So we have recommended that that piece would stay with council, but the remainder could come to the admin policies. There's also the ability for the committee to request information around some of our processes and our internal controls. So some of that is dealt with as part of the audit. And if there's any concerns from the audit process, certainly that would come back from the auditors to this committee already. But there may be an interest in the committee looking at some of our other controls, perhaps around things like our information technology systems, and the controls we have around security. And it could be other controls around safeguarding of assets or approving our transactions or those types of things. So those are things that aren't necessarily reported anywhere now formally, but certainly could be information the committee might be interested in. Tax policy, I mentioned, most of the tax policy pieces already come to this committee. This committee also approves the tax write-offs. Certainly some options for additional information around our assessment role management processes, how we manage the assessments, how we work with MPAC in that, how we determine the growth projections that are used within our budget. So there's certainly additional information that could be optional there. I mentioned procurement and certainly the delegated authority reporting that could be redirected to this committee. Also additional information there that committee might be interested in around things like our procurement statistics. So council certainly does ask questions when we bring reports to them around the procurement in terms of number of submissions on an RFP, the number of RFPs or tenders that we've done in a year, the scope of the procurements. And so those are all, that's all information that certainly we have available and could bring to the committee. I mentioned the corporate investments and the grant reporting. And then finally, the asset management. We have included this, particularly because as the committee is aware and as council's aware, we are currently working through our asset management plans as part of the provincial regulations. And some of that information has come to council already. But there will be, as we work through some of those requirements of the province, there will be discussions required around service levels. And how that relates to the asset management investment. And so certainly that's something that staff have seen could also come to the committee level. So I think the only thing I will mention, Mr. Chair, is just within that report, we did provide a sample agenda just so the committee could get a feel for what this might look like. I just listed the 6 meetings of administrative policies, and sort of within those categories of audit, financial reporting, tax policy, and then basically procurement and other, where some of these might fall within the timings. And potentially what those agendas might look like. I think it'll take us a little bit just to kind of transition to this and feel our way through it and what it might look like. And so I think it'll sort of take that 1 full year as we try to transition, particularly where we're moving reporting from a council level to a committee level. So that on page 9 of the report does sort of give just a draft agenda of potentially what we're recommending it could look like over a year in terms of what would be either already existing or added to the administrative policies agendas.
Thank you, Madam Treasurer. So just on that last point, which I think is significant, the moving of reporting from going directly to council to rather to coming to this committee in an expanded scope. This is a recommendation that your department is happy to make, not having received direction from council in that regard.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. So I think the motion from council asked that we bring forth some recommendations as to what an expanded role for administrative policies would look like. And so these are things that we are identifying. I think if the committee is comfortable with this and passes this motion tonight, it will still go to council. And I think council as a whole will also need to be comfortable that they are delegating some of this reporting to the committee level for perhaps further discussion and review that then might happen at a council level. So I think at the end of the day, we have 3 different levels of responsibility. We have council as a whole, who is ultimately responsible for financial management within the city, with that responsibility as well with myself and the team. And so then council then has to decide what they're comfortable to move to a committee level in terms of those oversight. So for example, the audit plan tonight, as we heard, doesn't necessarily go to council. It's discussed at this committee level. Council has delegated that to the committee to work with the auditor and to review the plan and to review the findings report. So I think that's where council needs to decide. And then we have management, who's ultimately responsible for making sure that we've got the proper processes and the proper controls in place around each of these areas. And our responsibility obviously is to bring the information that the committee or council requires to ensure that they're covering off their responsibility for financial oversight. So the staff certainly have our own responsibilities, as well as a responsibility to bring the information that the committee thinks is important to address their responsibilities.
So council's direction was what it would look like if we move some things, and this is the recommendation of which things to move, essentially, and also how to restructure the financial oversight pieces pursuant to that council motion. So, okay, that's clear enough for me. Any other questions? We're at questions only. So if you have opinions, I'm going to make you wait until we're done questions. Who wants to ask questions? This is for clarity of the report and any further diving into the information provided here. Okay, well, seeing none, maybe it's time to get a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. The recommendation is that the Administrative Policies Committee, hang on a second. want to make sure I get this right. So this is the deferred recommendation. We now have the extra information, but the recommendation itself is the same. Is that correct, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Chair, through you, that's correct. The recommendation stayed the same. It was just the extra information provided.
Okay, so now we have to decide what to do with the original recommendation now that we have this extra information. That recommendation is that the AP committee endorse the scope of expanded oversight responsibilities as outlined in report number AP 21-010, which, as I'll remind the committee, was the June report. That council direct staff to implement changes to the reporting functions and oversight responsibilities of the AP committee as outlined in report number AP 21-010, and to transition changes to the respective council and committee agendas over the coming year, which is the original recommendation. Need a mover and a seconder to get on the floor, and then we can have our debate. Moved by Councillor McLaren, second by Councillor Osanek. Who would like to speak to this reappearing original recommendation? All right, I guess I'll give up the chair to Madam Vice Chair because I would like to speak as a committee member.
Is that me?
Yeah, that is you, Councillor Osanek.
Okay. I just joined the committee. This is like my first. But anyway, I accept the chair and I recognize you.
Yeah, I don't know how that this transpired, but that's what it says in the agenda. So thank you. All right, so as just a member of the committee, if I'm looking at this as a committee member, I would say, is the committee structure more appropriate for some of this information? And what, and if it is, why is that? So first of all committees allow expanded discussion on any topic. They allow members of the public to speak in unlimited amounts, essentially. Members of the committee to speak in unlimited amounts, sort of like the way, because we're not under the same constraints as council. So there's that. The expanded time can be allotted. The committee rules apply rather than the council rules. Delegations, are to the committee and not to council. There's the structure itself is somewhat less formal and more flexible. That's from a procedure point of view. As a councillor, so as someone that maybe if I weren't on this committee, I would receive this not having the benefit of that front row seat in the committee. I would say the disadvantage of having some things at committee that were previously at council is that they now come to you unless you attended the committee meeting as an ex officio member, you wouldn't actually have the benefit of any of the discussion. Whereas if you don't have a go to committee, it happens at council. I think that distinction really needs to be considered carefully before we approve or deny any recommendation. We do budget as committee of the whole, and nobody believes we should have. I don't believe it's legitimate to suggest that the City of Kingston should have a budget committee. That's one thing I think should remain as. So when we look at financial oversight, I think it's my opinion as a member of this committee that we do need a better way of providing financial oversight, especially if that's what is the perceived role of this committee. So many of Councillor Chappelle's often repeated remarks are actually very well founded. The other thing that I would say, is, in my opinion, is that to the name, so administrative policies doesn't really describe the fact that we might be in a financial oversight capacity. The audit doesn't provide that opportunity. We already heard that tonight. We've heard that before. So is the suggestion the overall suggestion, is it that we have a better way of going into the details of how we spend the money as a city, and what is the forum for that? I think it's legitimate to say that that should be at committee and not at council, because it's going into a greater detail than council would normally go. I think part of the reason that we're in this situation is because our budget process needs to be reformed. That's a completely separate issue. The budget process is not detailed. Councillor Chappelle has mentioned this at budget time many times. The budget process, getting the line by line information, being able to analyze it properly it's not possible the way that it is right now. The way that it comes committee of the whole at budget time, even though we have 2 days of deliberations and possibly a third, it is not structured for us as councillors to be able to provide financial oversight. And if that's the problem, then what we need is budget reform, not a budget committee. Budget reform. Budget reform means we get involved at budget time before that final committee of the whole discussion. So one of the suggestions was to do that at committee. If that's what we want, then we need to have a committee of the whole or a council direction to have budget deliberations in a different format than the ones that we have. Sitting through 2 hours of presentations from all the different departments and then again having questions is not adequate for financial oversight. It's not. It just turns into either grandstanding or random questions about what's presented by the presenter at the time. It's not proper budgeting. We are not involved in the budget process. That is the reality that Councillor Chappelle has brought forward and persistently spoken to. So what we have to decide as a committee is moving things to administrative policies going to provide that level of control at budget time. And I would say budget reform is what provides that. So, as a member of this committee, do I volunteer to give the impression to my council colleagues that aren't on the committee that we're going to do that function? I don't actually. I don't think it's possible in this format. I think the format is committee of the whole budget reform. So, and this isn't necessarily, this is not a negative comment, but I think that these persistent suggestions from Councillor Chappelle have forced us all to think about this. And this is where I'm at right now. So I'm actually going to vote against this recommendation because I don't think it solves any of our problems, as Councillor Chappelle has put forward. And I think that we need to go back to square one, seriously consider either budget reform or specific changes to the budget reporting process that the council directs through individual motions. So that's my 2 cents as a member of this committee. And I return, that's it. That's all I have to say. I'm voting it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I return the chair to you.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak to the original recommendation, which has now come back to us? Councillor Sanek.
So I know that this report is the response to the motion, and I'm willing to try it for the next year, and then maybe the new council after in 2023, maybe they want to do budget reform. Like, it's going to be too late already for November's budget. And personally, I don't want to get involved with a whole bunch of budget meetings next year at this time because it's an election year, right? Like, there's only so many hours in a day and there's so many committees. Like this month of October, I have one night off with no meetings. One night from Monday to Thursday, except this week there was nothing on Monday. So it's just like realistically, what the time demands are. And, we're not full-time counselors and I just can't get into the weeds like that. I got to stay afloat. I got to keep swimming. And, and so this satisfies me and those counselors that are interested, in really getting to it. I looked at the calendar that's in the report, and there's those meetings. Let me see, I'm only on one screen too. We got the operating budget reports, coming June 3rd, August 4th, counselors can, if they really want to get into the weeds, can go to those reports and ask tons of questions at those meetings. So I'm fine with trying it out the way that is proposed. Thank you.
Councilor Senek, would anyone else wish to speak to the recommendation? Councilor Chappelle, go ahead.
Thank you, through Chair. One of the reasons why this is all, I thought originally through consultation with a number of constituents that it would be very helpful to have a committee that would randomly choose various departments, maybe 1 or 2 per year, so that you can cycle through 8 of them over the course of your term of that fine-tooth line by line scrutiny. Because quite frankly, without having, and I'm not suggesting staff are nefarious or doing bad things, but what I'm suggesting is that if there's no oversight, people get lazy. They purchase items from the same people all the time. They don't go out to tender. They don't do due diligence because it becomes comfortable. They resist that change. And if we had an opportunity to scrutinize line by line of a various department, everyone becomes sharper. Everyone accepts that role of the stewardship of the tax dollar more seriously. Not that I'm suggesting that they don't now, but we're spending money, and it's like it doesn't matter, and it does matter, and that's where I wanted this whole conversation to go. And what's perverse out now doesn't address that, because if I ask Ms. Kennedy, will this permit me an opportunity to say I want to talk about the social housing benefit, or I want to talk about the third crossing and do a line by line audit with this committee? Do we have that authority with this proposal? I don't know. It doesn't seem to me. It's all periphery, high level, 50,000 foot view, where we're not getting into that zone of materiality that's in the $5,000 range. And that's a concern for me, because $5,000 is an easy check out the door so fast that if you don't mind the pennies, the dollars get lost. And so I'll just ask this one question, Ms. Kennedy. We've had this conversation going on since I went to the FNUM conference way back pre-COVID. So this is 3 years this has been going on. Will this structure that's proposed allow us to say transportation will be discussed in June 2022? It's going to be a line by line budget. We're going to do a full review. Would this committee be the one to do that the way it's proposed?
Thank you, Councillor. Through you, Mr. Chair. So yes, that is where that could come. So what I would envision is certainly the operating reports and the capital reports that are coming. So that is a summary of all the departments. So if the committee wanted to look specifically at housing as an example, housing is on there at a high level, as you'll recall. But that's where the committee could then say, you know what, at the next meeting, we want to see housing. We would have the director of housing there and be able to go through and answer those questions. So I think what this does is it puts that information at a high level in front of the committee and then provides them with the opportunity to say, we'd like to drill down further. I think even you talked about third crossing. Third crossing would be listed on the capital status report. So I think it would then stem to, we'd like more information on this and specific and provide staff with the request of specific information they would like. So I think this is one way to do it. And as listed in the supplementary report, then there's also the opportunity, if it didn't fit within any of these or these umbrellas that we've provided, and there may be other things that the committee wants to see, then it would just be a motion directing staff that at a future agenda, we'd like to have a discussion about information security controls and what we're doing on those, just as an example.
Thank you. Councillor Spell, you still have the floor.
I just think that it's at such a high level and it doesn't map out what we originally discussed going on 3 years ago, that I'm troubled to look at this as an appeasement to then have a busy councillor say, look, I don't want to be on that committee because they're going to be into the weeds. Well, that's where I want to go. That's where I really think is important for the city as we come out of COVID. And I agree with you, Councillor Sanik, that you certainly don't want to be stuck in doing that next year as everyone gears up for re-election. But something has to happen. Maybe this approach is a start, but it's certainly not adequate. When you have budget committees, like we don't even have participants, like, and to Councillor Stroud, you're spot on. Our budgetary process at the end of the year, 3 nights, it's oxymoronic. It's brutal. And I really cherish the comments that Councillor McLaren makes about a participatory budget and allowing citizens to see what the priorities are. Like we have a $400 million budget. And the line of sight that we have is like, I get as much on my tax bill to tell me where we're spending money. It doesn't help. We don't have that information. So I'm really torn, Ms. Kennedy. I know you've done a lot of work on this and your staff has too, on whether I want to support this or not. I really struggled with it. And but I do appreciate the efforts you put into to have this drag on for so long. I know the meeting that we missed in the summer wasn't your fault. This was the only item on it, but it might have been a good item to have on that back in August. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Spell. Do the other 2 members of the committee wish to speak to this item? No? You're allowed a second round of comments if anyone wishes. If not, we'll go to the recommendation. Councillor Sanik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I say we follow this recommendation. We see how those operating budget meetings go in 2022. And then in 2023, right, the new council's there. And if they want to go deeper into it, then that's when there can be a motion to form a budget committee meeting, or just, we will be practiced, whoever's on council will be practiced then to say at the next admin policies meeting, when we are going to be bringing the Q2 operating budget report in August, we want to, speak directly to the housing and homelessness director, right? Like, let's give that a try. Let's see how it goes next year. And then in 2023, we can tweak it for the remainder of that council term, whoever's on council at that time. So I'm going to be supporting this too.
Thank you, Councillor. You make some excellent points. I just have a couple more things to say, so I guess I'll have to give you the chair again.
I recognize you and I take the chair.
Thank you. Yeah, whether we pass this recommendation or not, it doesn't really get to the central point of Councillor Chappelle's ongoing campaign, I guess you could say, to get greater financial oversight at council. At the same time, I do not hold the treasurer responsible for this situation. This is not a situation created by the treasurer. Okay, this is the treasurer that we see at this committee, the treasurer that's done all this work, the treasurer that's come up with some excellent new recommendations to move us in that direction based on essentially legitimate, a professional standard that is so high that can acknowledge legitimate concerns when they're presented, even if they're not always articulated clearly by a committee or by council. Taking a council recommendation, coming back with something very useful, which is this report. So when I say I don't support it, it's not because I don't agree with what the treasurer has done. It's that I don't want to give the impression that these changes will get us to where we need to be. So then the question becomes, do we do as Councillor Osanek suggests, pass it, try it out, it's an election year, maybe run on budget reform. Maybe Councillor McLaren could run on participatory budgeting, and maybe some other councillors might do so, and we get some critical mass for doing that. I don't know whether he's listening, but anyway. I don't know whether, I guess what I'm saying is it's kind of a moot point whether we make these changes now or not. It's hard to argue against what Councillor Osanek is saying, is that we should at least try it. But I will repeat my point that I don't want this committee to be held responsible for the budget problems that we have at budget time. So we can't assume responsibility for lack of transparency at the budget. You know, that's not, this committee can't take that responsibility. That responsibility, it remains with council. And it remains council's job to find solutions to that. So I don't know if that's what the rest of our colleagues are going to think. If we come back with a recommendation to enhance the scope of this committee to supposedly provide greater financial oversight, I don't know if they're going to believe it to be sufficient, but I don't believe it to be sufficient. That doesn't mean the recommendation is terrible. It just means it doesn't finish the job. So I'm going to maintain my position that it's better to not give the impression that we're fixing something and make no changes than it is to go halfway, and as legitimate as the recommendations are, if we hold back, it might put the pressure on council to make the changes that need to be made. Thank you.
Okay, I return the chair to you, Mr. Chair, and Councillor Bohm has his hand up.
Councillor Bohm, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. Appreciate all staff's time on this. I do share some of the same concerns, though, as what Councillor Chappelle brought this forward to. And I think part of that concern is the fact that even if this, even if we made a new budget committee or we expanded, our ability, I'm still not sure that it's going to strike to the heart of what people in the community want to see. And you mentioned it there, Mr. Chair. It's an allusion to what Councillor McLaren has said, as well as it's the participatory budget process. And that's truly when people in the community feel like they were able to have input into the decision-making process, but also have that input matter and lead to, discernible results, not just, well, we put into it and then council disappeared and went to some special committee and then they went to committee of the whole, and well, all the input we put in as citizens didn't really ever make it through to the grinder and the end of what came out. So I'm not sure. I don't feel that these changes are going to address those concerns from a taxpayer or a citizen's kind of engagement level. So I don't know, I almost look at it like, some of the charities that we've all seen and we're involved in actually have their final numbers reviewed by just like regular people, just go, hey, here's what we did, here's how we got here, have a look, see if there's anything that concerns you. So I don't know if us doing it as council or as an admin policy committee or as, just committee of the whole, however you want to slice and dice it, I don't know if that's going to create any more faith in the system. I personally think having something like 10 random citizens selected at random to go through the process with staff might yield a better result and build more trust in the system. I think part of the problem is as long as it's always us, it's going to be seen as, well, they're politicians and they have a vested interest. So I mean, if we really want to build faith in the system and show that there's truly nothing to hide, then I'd say you have to have ordinary citizens involved in the review of this process. So I don't know personally how we get to that point. I think what this tonight is going to do is it will provide some of the mechanisms, but it's not going to create any more faith than what's already there. It's just going to create more work for probably already exhausted committee members and staff. So if we're really looking at the end result, which, and Councillor Chappelle, break in and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's to build faith in the taxpayer and the constituency that we really are dialing down to those minute details and getting the best bang for our dollar. And the only way I see to do that is to actually have citizens do it, basically be part of this process, and then their word out there spreading it. Hey, we looked over that. We really did get to the bottom of it. And, that was the best choice. Or what if we try something different here? So, I mean, if we're talking about open and transparent government, it's having them not just be involved in shaping the budget, but in overseeing it and basically criticizing it where it needs to be criticized. So I don't know. I think I'm going to vote against this recommendation because I don't see it creating any good that we don't already have. I believe I'm creating an agreement with your Councillor. I'm not sure it's going to generate the good that we're hoping for. And I think that the only way that we do that is to just really open things up to the public. And that's where you're going to create that faith and trust in the system. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Bowen. That was the second round of debate. If I don't see any hands, I guess we'll move to the question. So I've already read the recommendation. It is the original June recommendation. It was deferred, came back with additional information. This was presented today. We've all acknowledged all the effort and work done by the treasurer and her department on behalf of the committee, regardless of the vote. That remains the case. We appreciate this. I guess on that, I will call a question on the recommendation. All those in favor of the recommendation? All those opposed? Motion fails 2-3 with Councillors Chappelle, Bohm, and Stroud opposed. We now move to business item. No, that was withdrawn. That's it then. We're down to the end of the agenda. Madam Clerk, are there any motions or notices of motion?
Mr. Chair, there are no motions or notices of motion this evening.
Okay. Is there any other business from members of the committee? None formally presented at this time. Was there any correspondence, Madam Clerk?
Mr. Chair, there are no correspondence this evening.
Okay, well, our next meeting is December 9th. I would actually point out that even though the recommendation failed, that timetable that was in that exhibit that gave us all a window into how staff time the items that come to us. They have them sort of on their calendars, right? The items all have a time that they come to us. The audit review process comes in October, so it comes every year at this time, for example. That's going to be the case even though that motion failed. But some of the things the changes that were proposed aren't going to happen unless council overrules. I just would suggest that the committee take another look at that table so that we know, so you know what is the structure of the regular agenda items that come to committee and how that comes to be. I found that to be very helpful. Anyway, our next meeting is December 9th, and I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. Councillor McLaren, Councillor Chappelle, all those in favor? Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next committee meeting.